The shock was taken before 9. It was pressed till far beyond noon, and the knights attempting to charge again and again could never get home against that hail of arrows and the perpetually repeated lightning advances and retirement. The Christians fell back between the repeated charges, still seeking to avoid the envelopment that seemed inevitable, and beginning to bunch and lose formation. Bohemond in the morning, at the first sight of the great concentration appearing before him, had sent urgent messages to bring up the rear guard, with Godfrey and Raymond from the second column 7 miles to the south. They came up only just in time. Of these, Godfrey of Bouillon was on the field first, with 50 knights only about him. The rest of his command, the mounted part of it, coming on at a gallop. Immediately afterwards, Hugh with the rear guard and the men of Provence came up in support. But it was almost mid-afternoon, between 2 and 3 o'clock, before the reinforcement, far superior in number to the original forward column, could make its weight felt. And already, that advanced body had been pushed back against its baggage train and was defending itself as best it could, partly covered by the vehicles. The Turks were already outflanking either end of the original Christian line, now hardly a line any longer, but rather a scrum. They would have surrounded and annihilated it in another hour or less when the large second echelon began to arrive. These sufficed to turn the tide of the battle. It would seem from the confused accounts which remain to us that they succeeded in doing so by extending rapidly upon the left wing of the enemy until the Turks themselves were exhausted by their 6-hour fight. At last, as more and more of the southern French came up, the Turks were threatened with envelopment in their turn, and gave way. Once they had given way, it was a rout. The immense concentration of Turkish forces, which their enemies estimated as a force as large as all the Crusaders and Pilgrims together, turned into isolated mounted bands, flying eastward and northward through the hills. Though there was no destruction of the enemy force, Dorylaeum, as the sun sank somewhat lower in the bronze and dusty sky of that broiling afternoon, had proved to be a complete decision. The Seljuk Turks could attack no more. The long way to Syria was open, and, what was more, the West had proved, after so many generations, its superiority over the East. Loosely knit as these crusading bands were, they had discovered sufficient energy in action to throw back the Seljuk menace to Christendom. They proved themselves capable of advance against Mohammedan armies in an ordeal to which the two religions had each summoned all the force at its disposal. The victory was won. The Christians here camped by the riverside for 2 days, and then took the road forward. Dorylaeum had been fought upon the 1st of July. Through the 2nd and 3rd there was no movement. On the 4th, the long and now united column set out once more. The thing that was coming was a trial so severe that we can hardly explain even the partial survival of that army. The Turks had devastated everything along the road which the Crusaders must follow, though there was little enough to devastate in that increasingly salt world. Still, what there was to take had been taken, and what there was to burn and pull down had been destroyed. The Crusaders came on no crops. They passed, and that but rarely, villages that were heaps of rubble and isolated unroofed walls, occasional blackened stumps of what had been fruit trees, and wells filled up and dry. Water gave out. Men died of thirst in multitudes and of exhaustion. Most of the horses were lost. The animals driven for food, the kine and even dogs, were pressed into the service to carry such essential provisionment as the army and its still remaining bands of unarmed followers had to take with it. At last, they came through the mountain gates into the fertility of the Iconian plain. Iconium, Turkish Konish, is 150 miles as the crow flies from Dorylaeum. By the road the host had taken, skirting the mountains, the distance was half as much again, and it is a testimony to the nature of that march of death that the advance averaged less than 8 miles per day. The policy of devastation had been carried out thoroughly here at Iconium also. The city was found utterly deserted and gutted of every form of provisionment. But before they set out again, certain chance Armenians, Christians of course, dribbled in and gave them good counsel. They were advised to take provision of water with them, because there was yet another desert to come,